a.m. I'll call to order the September 9th, 2020 meeting of the Contractor State Licensing Board. My name is David Delatorre, the CSLB's board chair. First, I want to start by welcoming our new board member. On August 12th, 2020, Governor Newsom appointed Donald Giarratano. Don fills one of the two C specialty contractor positions, holding a C4 and C36 license. Don has served as the Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and President of DRG Construction since 2013. Prior to 2013, he has served in various leadership roles in the construction industry. Don is a member of the California Plumbing and Mechanical Contractors Association. Don, congratulations and welcome to the board. Felice, can we take roll call and confirm that we have a quorum?
David Delatorre.
Here.
Kevin Albanese.
Here.
Frank Altamira.
Here.
Augie Beltran.
Here.
Miguel Gonzalez. Absent. Don Giarratano.
Here.
Susan
Actually,
Granzella?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Please, Miguel is here. He's a new member, so he may be having problems with his mute, but he should be here.
Okay.
You may want to try him again.
Miguel Gonzalez.
Yes, Miguel Galares is here.
Okay. Susan Granzella.
Here.
Diana Love.
Here.
Paula Richardson. Absent. James Mullane.
Marlo is here.
Okay. Jim Mullane.
Here.
Johnny Simpson.
Here.
Nancy Springer. Absent.
That's it? Okay, so it appears that we do have a quorum, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Also joining us today is Registrar David Fote, Chief Deputy Registrar Tanya Corcoran, CSLB staff, and our board legal counsel, Jason Hurtado. At this time, I ask that you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we continue, I would first like to take this opportunity to say that our thoughts go out to everyone whose lives have been directly and indirectly impacted by the August lightning fires, and with the brave men and women in the front lines battling the blazes. This is our third board meeting where board members, the public, and staff are all participating remotely, so bear with us. Today's meeting is not being video recorded. Board members, when you would like to comment at any time throughout the meeting, please use the hand icon to raise your hand. I will call on you to speak. At that point, please unmute yourself, and when finished, return to mute. If you could also click again on the hand icon to lower your hand. Public Affairs Chief Rick Lopes is serving as our meeting moderator. He will be assisting us by monitoring the public teleconference line.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, if I could just interrupt for a moment. Mary Tykert has joined as well.
Great. Elise, if you can note that.
Actually, if we can just for a moment, Mary, if you can please just check your microphone to make sure we can hear you, okay?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we will begin with agenda item B, which is for public comment and requests for agenda items for future meetings. The board values public input as part of the consumer protection mission. To allow us enough time to conduct our full schedule of business today, I am limiting public comments to 3 minutes apiece. If your comments do not involve an item on today's agenda, this would be the time where you can make them. If you have comments on one of our agenda items, we would encourage you to wait until we get to that item. We will give you an opportunity to make your comments at that time. There are a few other rules that apply. First, California law prohibits board members from discussing any matter brought up during public comment, and we're not allowed to act on any item not on today's agenda. Second, if you want the board to discuss a topic not on the agenda, you can ask us to consider placing that issue on the agenda of a future meeting. If you have an application, complaint, or disciplinary charges pending before the board, we ask that you not discuss the details of your case or pending complaint. That's because board members may be the judges and by law are not permitted to receive evidence or information that is not part of the administrative record in the case. Members of the public, if you joined us through the WebEx link and would like to make a comment, use the chat feature to send a note that you would like to offer public comment. If you joined us by calling in and would like to make a public comment, please press *3. We will use the same system throughout the meeting for public comment during each agenda item. Are there any comments? Board members, please raise your hand if you have an agenda item you would like placed on future meetings, on a future meeting agenda. Okay, seeing none. Rick, are there any members of the public who wish to address the board?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do have somebody standing by. JP Tenore, please go ahead and make your public comment. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, there's a lot of problems with the gig economy. Before I go renewing my C7 license low voltage or upgrading it to a C10, I'd like to address problems with the gig economy and so-called independent contractors doing cabling services as part of Work Market, OnForce, Field Nation. And then also there's other traditional contracting. Mine's kind of a little bit specialty because it's in technology, but like companies like Workyard, where they're not really employees, and they're their own boss supposedly, but that's kind of up for debate. I've noticed that there's a couple of things. I reported some cases where I had proof of screenshots where just simply because there wasn't an enforcement agent past 8 p.m., they didn't get into trouble. And I'd like to have some enforcement action against, because it doesn't make sense for me to even, I can go into technology or I can go into cabling services. And right now I've been sticking into technology a little bit more. And before I go renewing my license, I'd like to address companies, like there's one company that in particular, I won't mention names, where it's, they go into restaurants and they have like 2 or 3 employees that do field service and the rest of the gig economy. And they handle all the major chains, and some of which happens to be cabling. I also want to get those companies into trouble. I also want to, there are national service companies, some of which it's hard to get licenses in all 50 states. I'd like to propose that they get licenses at least as you get a salesperson's license. And that's for that particular company to make it legitimate. And I'd like to give them the opportunity to make it right, because they aren't gross violators necessarily, and they happen to be large companies. I don't know if that made sense, but anyway, I have 3 minutes, but I guess I'm done. I've reported it a couple times. I've even met with the SWIFT team once up when I was up in Northern California. No idea what the gig economy was at that time. And I'd like to bring this up, and it's a major, major, major problem these days. And I'd like to get the gross violators in trouble. And then I'd like to preserve some of the national companies that give them a chance to make it right, where they do get a license in California, because they have to get a license in all 50 states. Some are very legitimate.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Tenori. Also, Mr. Chair, that's the only public comment we have, but Nancy Springer has joined the meeting. So if we can just quickly check her audio. Nancy, can you hear us okay?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can. Welcome.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Mr. Chair, there is no other public comment at this time.
Thank you, Rick. Felice, can you kindly note that Nancy's in? Nancy joined us.
Yes.
Okay, so there's no further comment. Moving to agenda item C. Update from the Department of Consumer Affairs. This is an oral update. There are no materials to reference in your board packet. I will now turn it over to Carrie Holmes, Deputy Director, Board and Bureau Relations.
Good morning. I'm Carrie Holmes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Carrie Holmes, Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Relations at the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you so much for allowing me to introduce myself and to provide a department update. I'd like to congratulate your new member, Donald Giratano, on his appointment and welcome him to the board. I'm new as well. I was appointed by Governor Newsom to serve as Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Relations beginning June 1st. I most recently came from the Senate, where I was Legislative Director for Senator Jim Bell. Before my time in the legislature, I served at the Secretary of State's office as Assistant Deputy. I've always been passionate about consumer protection, and so I'm very happy to be here at DCA working with the boards and bureaus. I am part of a new leadership team, as you know. In January, Governor Newsom appointed Lourdes Castro Ramirez as the new Secretary of the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency, effective March 2nd. Governor Newsom appointed Jennifer Simoes as DCA's Deputy Director of Legislation and Megan Allred as Deputy Director of Legislation. Finally, on April 16th, Christine Lally was appointed by Governor Newsom as the Chief Deputy Director of DCA, and she joined us in July. Now that Director Kirkmeyer has her team in place, she can devote even more time to her top priorities. I'm happy to report that in July, the DCA Budget Office and Office of Information Services launched 4 new budget expenditure and revenue reports utilizing fiscal information. The reports are fast, detailed, and easy to generate. The 4 new reports can be produced using DCA's Quality Business Interactive Reporting Tool, or QBIRT. The fast, accurate reports with clean data will aid board staff in providing budget reports in your meeting materials. DCA is very pleased to be providing these reports and is working on 3 more budget reports for the future. Another DCA priority is regulations, improving timelines and transparency. DCA's regulations unit was created by DCA Legal to directly assist boards and bureaus with regulations packages. The department also developed an online system to electronically manage and track regulations packages and streamline review called Sharewell. Sharewell testing with a pilot cohort is now complete. There will be regular check-ins with the pilot groups to solicit feedback, and the feedback will be evaluated to determine the next stages of the rollout. Our work continues, even though COVID-19 has changed the way we do business now and in the future. DCA temporarily closed all offices to the public in March in response to state and local stay-at-home orders to reduce the spread of COVID-19. DCA and the boards and bureaus have implemented telework plans and have required physical distancing for employees who cannot telework. DCA offices reopened to the public on June 15th with preventative measures to safeguard the health and safety of our employees and visitors. We are truly grateful to you for your continued service and to your staff who are being so flexible. I know you have many staff contributing to contact tracing and other emergency efforts. This work is very important and DCA thanks you. One of the few upsides to staying home is the opportunity to expand online and remote learning. I want to invite you to participate in DCA's board member orientation, which is being offered as 2 half-day sessions on WebEx, October 21st and 28th. New board members are required to attend the training within their first year of appointment. You can register on DCA's board member resources page. I look forward to getting to know you better and the day we'll meet in person. In the meantime, if you have any questions or need anything from DCA, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm still fairly new, so I may not have an answer for you today, but I will find it. I'm here to help. Thank you again for inviting me to your meeting. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Carrie. Board members, please raise your hand if you have any comments. Seeing none, Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comments on this item.
Next is the executive update. We will begin with agenda item D1, review and possible approval of the June 5th, 2020 and the July 24th, 2020 board meeting minutes. We will start with the June 5th, 2020 meeting minutes on page 11 of your packet. Do any board members have edits to the June 5th, 2020 minutes?
Augie Beltran, motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second for Albany.
Second.
So it's been moved and second. Any comments? Any public comment?
No public comment.
Elise, can you take roll call?
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Gonzalez,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Mola Richardson,
Aye.
Jimmy Wayne, absent. Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Aye.
Mary Teichert.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, please. We will now move to the July 24th, 2020 meeting minutes, which begin on page 29. Do any board members have edits to the July 24th, 2020 minutes? Please.
Augie Beltran, motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Nancy Springer, second.
Is there any other board comment or any board comment? Hearing none. Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comment.
Elise, please take roll call.
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Abstain as I was not present.
Frank Altamira,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Marla Richardson, absent.
Aye.
Okay. Jimmy Wayne, absent. Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Aye.
Mary Teichert. Absent. Motion passes.
Thank you, please. Next on the agenda is the registrar report. We will be taking some items out of order on the agenda. First, I'd like if David can start by giving us an update on the expenditure reduction plan, which is outlined under the budget update on page 43 of the board packet. After, we will then have Stacy provide the remainder of the budget update and return to David to complete the outstanding items of the registrar report. David, please provide an update on the reduction plan along with an update on COVID-19 and the effects on CSLB operations.
Thank you, Chair Delatorre. At the June 5th board meeting, the board directed staff to implement $7.1 million in cost reduction measures. The cost reduction measures included achieving $4.5 million in salary savings by maintaining 45 vacancies out of 425 budget approved positions. Subsequent to that June 5th meeting, there's been a few changes with our staffing that I want to provide an update on today. The enforcement representatives were reclassified to special investigators. This resulted in the majority of our investigators receiving a 5% wage increase. All staff received a 9.23% pay cut. What happened with the pay cut is that staff received 2 days off each month to compensate for that pay cut. When we took a look at what the 9.2% pay cut equated to as far as staffing, we found that it was equivalent to 25 staff positions. So that's a loss of productivity. In addition to the loss of productivity for the 2 days off each month, we've had to redirect 18 of our staff to COVID-19 contact tracing. The majority of the staff that were redirected came from our SWIFT unit. They were SWIFT units, they were special investigators. We have 47 staff that are participating in the Special Enhanced Family Medical Leave Program. This provides up to 12 weeks of time off for staff to care for family members. An example is staff that have children that are distance learning. We have a lot of staff that are now working either part-time or not at all. They're taking time off and they're not available to us. We took a look at the loss of productivity for that program, and it equates to 22 staff positions. The board directed us to maintain 45 vacant positions June 5th. I'm pleased to report that we've averaged more than 45 vacant positions since that time. As of today, we have 51 vacant positions. But when we took all that, we put it together, and it equates to 115 of our budgeted positions not being available to us. That's 25% of our workforce. And it's having a significant impact on our operations. As many of you know, and we heard from during the public comment today, we're not as effective as we once were with our SWIFT unit. Most of the staff now are redirected to COVID-19 contact tracing. Very limited response to unlicensed, uninsured practice leads. We are, and Jesse Flores, our Deputy Chief of Enforcement, will talk about it a little bit more, but we're closing consumer complaints when we can't settle them, and the estimated financial injury is less than $10,000. We don't have staff available to work as effectively as we once did with DAs to work on public works investigations and with our state agency partnering. We've had to redirect staff from within all of the board divisions to help our licensing division, because the priority does remain on renewals and keeping our licensed contractors in business, and whatever it takes, that's what we're going to make happen. I know public affairs too has been impacted by the inability to fill a position that was vital to them. I talked to Jason Hurtado about this presentation this morning, and he told me that a board vote is not necessary to reduce the 45 threshold to perhaps 35. It's up to the board to decide if they want to do that. But I wanted to make this presentation today to ask you that, to let you know that we would really like to reduce the 45 threshold to 35. We're committed to achieving that 4.5 million in salary savings. But to be effective in doing that, and in light of what's happened with the pay reductions and other loss of staff, we will need to, in my opinion, fill positions, and a number of 35 would be more realistic than 45. So that's my update on the expense reduction strategy and plan that was approved by the board. Back to you, David.
Thank you, David.
I wanted to cover, but I thought if we could talk about this and then have Stacy do the budget update. Then you could kick it back to me, and I could do the other items.
Well, thank you. And I would ask that staff continue prioritizing filling vacancies. Licensing should continue to be one of our top priorities. All right, so we will start our board discussion. Frank Altamara, would you like to share your comments? Is there any other board comment?
Yeah, hey, Dave, it's Kevin Albanese. To Dave, what sort of wildfire are we response are we anticipating that we're going to need to put up in addition to everything that we've talked about cutting back and whatnot just out of COVID and the budget issue?
Yeah, well, thank you, Kevin. I was going to talk about that in a few minutes, but it's perfect to talk about it now. We've had to direct resources to 8 counties, and it's always been a board priority that we provide materials in the wildfire zones, infected areas, that we have a presence. We work with the Department of Insurance. All that is happening. We've got the signs, we've got the materials delivered. In the county of Santa Cruz, they wanted staff to be on site, and we agreed to do that for approximately 10 days. But really it's difficult for us because now we're having to redirect staff, in some cases, to drive 100 miles each way to get to Santa Cruz to be present. And when we saw that the attendance was diminishing, we put a plan together. I want to thank Rick Lopes for working with me on that. We put a plan together where now we can have staff answer the phone remotely, and they've agreed to that, so that'll help us. But that is a real resource challenge. And so that's, again, affecting our enforcement divisions because they're the ones that have to respond to that.
Are there any other board comments?
You know, I just throw out, Dave, and I don't know if it's appropriate with all the civil service laws and whatnot, but, you know, if there's opportunities for board members, I know that everybody's probably living close to or near a county impacted. If a board member can volunteer for a shift or go down and be present, if that would be appropriate through the chair and the registrar, there might be some opportunities for that.
Appreciate your comments, Kevin. We'll look into that. Any other comments? Hearing none. Rick, are there any public comments?
No public comments on this item. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I did just have a hand go up. Alexis Custer, can you please go ahead and make your comments? You have 3 minutes.
Oh, certainly. So I just wanted to make a comment. I'm a consumer, actually. Filed a complaint recently, and I just wanted to bring kind of a personal note and personal voice to this discussion. I'm one of those that has been impacted by that reclassification of the enforcement reps as special investigators. My claim has been ongoing for 6 months. And I know that this won't get solved in this conversation, but I really want to know what, and moving forward, we can expect as consumers and how we can be protected from rogue contractors that aren't doing their work when there's not really a way to investigate or enforce it. And these claims are being closed prematurely.
If I may, this is Dave Fote. I would ask that you follow up, that Jesse Flores follow up with you on your complaint. One thing we're going to talk about is how we're now able to go back out and into the field using certain safety practices so that we can be as responsive as possible to consumer complaints. So if you'd be willing to maybe in the chat feature, Rick, would that work? Or she could provide her contact information and Jesse Flores will follow up and we'll provide an update to the board members.
Yes, absolutely. Alexis, if you're able to send me a chat message, if you could send me your number on a private message, I'll be sure to pass it on, have Jesse contact you.
Certainly. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
No other public comments at this time.
Thank you, Rick.
David, excuse me. It looks like Frank Altamura and John also had their hand raised for this item. If we could just check with them.
Frank.
Yeah, thank you.
Proceed.
I fumbled my button the first time. With regards to the staff adjustments, we mentioned the staff that were reassigned to contact tracing. I was wondering if one, if that was a voluntary action, and then two, roughly what the timeline is for that staff continuing to be diverted to that task.
Yes, thank you, Frank. It was a governor's mandate that all state departments identify staff for redirection to COVID-19 contact tracing. And that was our allocation, was we had to find 18 staff to redirect. And they had to be, I don't really want to get into too much of the weeds with classifications, but they had to be at the associate general, the AGPA, Tanya, government program analyst position or higher. So that limited the type of staff that were available. And so that's why we looked at our SWIFT unit, and the SWIFT staff for the most part did volunteer for that assignment. And we were told the assignment would last between 6 and 9 months. Now, of course, if there's a vaccine and the virus is no longer such a threat, then we would hopefully get those staff back. But they are working as COVID-19 contact tracers for counties throughout the state.
Great, thank you.
There was another comment?
It's Don Giortano.
Welcome.
I'm learning as I go here, so I apologize if I dig too deep into the weeds. But are you able to indicate that at the meeting here, David, what the difference in dollars is between 45 and 35 people?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. We generally look at the dollars being, just on round numbers, $100,000 per position. But the offset would be the salary reduction that occurred. And that was equivalent to, I think, 22.6 million. No.
Okay, that's helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any other comments? Hearing none. This was informational only. No action is required by the board. Next, we move to agenda item D3, the budget update, which begins on page 39 of your packet. For that, I will turn it over to Budget Manager Stacy Paul.
Thank you, Board Chair, and good morning, everybody. So your budget update begins on page 39, and the first chart shows our fiscal year 2019-20, and this is the budget and expenditures through May 31st. The projection through June, which would be the end of last fiscal year, is that I think we'll have, I'm pretty confident that our expenditures will be 66.8 million on board expenditures, which is about 95% of our budgeted authority. We currently don't have the fiscal reports through June yet, and those should be coming out sometime this month or next month. So I'll be able to present that at the next board meeting. The 66.8 million plus the 5.5 million in mandatory external costs will total 72.3 in total expenditures. So in that 5.5 in mandatory cost includes 4 million in statewide pro rata and 1.5 million in annual statewide supplemental pension payments to the CalPERS, which ends in 2025. The chart directly below is the revenue for 2019-20, which came in slightly lower than projected at 67.2 million. You can see from the chart that we brought in almost the same as the prior year. Renewals seemed to stay pretty steady. However, the revenue loss mainly came from the new licenses and app fees from the delay in administering exams to new applicants, which resulted in roughly 1.9 million revenue loss. If you flip the page, you'll see our governor's budget for this fiscal year 2021. As a reminder, CSLB is funded entirely through a special revenue fund, meaning we receive no general fund support, except for the occasional one-time reimbursements for a disaster response. Our existence relies solely on the revenue collected from licensing fees.
I got contact information.
And enforcement disciplinary actions. The governor's budget gives us the spending authority for this year to spend 73.6 million. However, based on the expenditure cost reduction plan of $7.9 million, we project to only spend $66.5 million, which means our total expenditure with the 5.5 mandatory cost comes to $72 million. This, keep in mind, is about the same that we spent last year in 1920, $72 million. We're trying to keep our expenditures in line with what we spent last year. On the next page, page 41, is our fund condition. If you look at last fiscal year, 2019-20, you can see our expenditures and mandatory external costs were $72 million, and we only brought in $67 million. This $5 million imbalance depleted our reserve, resulting in a beginning fund balance starting this year in July of $5.3 million. In the same chart, if you look at the column projected current year 2021, you'll see our revenue projection for this year of $70.7 million. This is based on an average monthly revenue that has been collected over the last 6 months during the pandemic. So we feel fairly confident that we'll at least be able to bring in $70 million this year. Directly below that, you can see our expenditures and mandatory external cost at the $72 million, which includes the 7.1 reduction in expenditures approved by the board. Assuming all goes as planned, that's a $1.3 million shortfall, leaving us with a projected $4 million at the end of this fiscal year, which is approximately 3 months of reserve, far less than the optimum 6 months fund balance reserve. Moving on, if you flip the page, this is the update of the fee audit with CPS consultant. The fee study is necessary to determine CSLB's cost to perform its mandatory functions. Review and processing of original applications for licensure. This study may support the need for a legislative fee increase at a later date. I'd also like to thank Board Chair David Delatorre for appointing a 2-person budget advisory committee consisting of board members Susan Granzella and Mary Teichert to review the draft report with the executive staff prior to the consultant presenting the findings at the December board meeting. And then lastly, I'd like to move on to page 44 and 47. That will is our statistical summaries. As you can see, over the last quarter, we saw a decline in new applications and the issuance of new licenses due to the pandemic. This was mainly due to the shutdown of exam administration over the last few months. During this time, renewals kept coming in and have stayed pretty steady and consistent. This concludes the budget update. Any questions?
Thank you, Stacy. Are there any questions?
Through the chair, this is Jim Ruane. If I could ask, since our operation is affected by COVID, I understand that, but it's also affected by these extraordinary wildfires. Is there any augmentation by FEMA or CalEMA that would be available to help our expenses?
That's Dave. Tanya, would you want to comment on that?
Sure. So we were given funding, but it was partial funding for the wildfires back in 17 and 18, and the funding came last year, but it was for a small amount. Stacey, you can correct me, but I think it was only for around $28,000, and our expenses were about triple that. So we are tracking every month with the budget office at Consumer Affairs our expenses as it relates to the wildfire. So that's our staffing, overtime, all of our supplies, and we are reporting that up through the administration. We are hopeful that we will receive some funding, but again, if it's any indication of last time, it typically comes, it won't come this fiscal year, it'll come like a year later, and we don't know what that amount will be, if there'll be funding at all for our program. So we really have to operate with our current budget and what we have authority for, and if we get it, then it's nice to have, but We've only gotten it one time in the past, and that was a couple years ago.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Any other
And
comments?
you are correct, Tanya. It was 28,000 this last time, and then 165,000 the year before. I mean, also keep in mind the contact tracers. We possibly could be reimbursed for that. So we are tracking that on a monthly basis to know full time when staff started reporting for that. So that way we can capture their personnel costs later on.
Any other comments? Okay. Well, with the budget projections showing expenditures exceeding revenue and the fee audit study being a few months from completion, we need to continue to be as physically prudent as possible. Is there any board discussion on this matter? We just went through that. This was informational only, no action required from the board. Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comment on this item.
Thank you. We are moving back to the remaining items of the registrar's report. There are no materials in your forward to Mr. Foe.
Thank you. This is informational. I'd like to begin with our response to COVID-19, just to provide an update to you all. All CSLB offices are now open to the public except for the Berkeley Test Center. In alignment with Governor Newsom's goals, 75% of CSLB staff are continuing to telework. I want to thank Department of Consumer Affairs for hosting a webinar recently that was very helpful to our staff in implementing employee training, monitoring, and assistance strategies, because it's been a little bit of a change for us to have staff not on site yet working from home. We want to make sure that we're checking in with them, that we set goals with them each week, and that we're maintaining the same level of production. The Attorney General's office has provided training to our enforcement staff on how to effectively conduct interviews by video conference that can be used in courtrooms. So that's been beneficial to us. And as I mentioned earlier, we continue to look at all of our internal resources to assist with our core business functions. And we have staff from the executive office, public affairs, enforcement, and IT, all helping with the licensing and processing to make sure that we keep up. So it's really all hands on deck, a group effort. With the chair's permission, I'll move on to the wildfire disaster response, have just a little more information to share with the board.
Please proceed.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we are continuing to provide materials at all counties that are impacted. We're working very closely with the Department of Insurance to post signs throughout the various fire zones. As many of you know, been on the board for a while, the signs are very effective in encouraging wildfire survivors to use the CSLB website to determine how they can obtain information through the Disaster Help Center page. Also, what information is available through our social media channels and media outreach. And they warn survivors about the scams that are often targeted on them, and hopefully reduce the number of predatory contractors, many of them unlicensed, that are in the areas. We continue to work very closely with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services and local agencies, including building departments, to collaborate our efforts with our limited resources, but also to issue press releases, conduct press conferences, participate in virtual town hall meetings and webinars. And I think, as Kevin said earlier, there's an opportunity for board members to assist here. I think it's certainly worthwhile work, and maybe if a board member was available to field some calls throughout the day, or I don't think you would get a lot of calls, but you'd get some, that could be very helpful. And also to work with us on the virtual town hall meetings. We'd welcome that opportunity. Our Public Affairs Office continues to work closely with district attorneys and getting press releases out. Rick reported this morning that we've been working very closely with Santa Cruz and Monterey counties, and a press release did go out in Monterey County within the last few days. We work very closely with local law enforcement agencies, and we're looking for opportunities to conduct sting operations when when it's safe to do so. But in the interim, we will be conducting sweep operations with the Department of Insurance and having a presence in these areas. And finally, it's just, we really do appreciate the collaboration we have with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services and the ability to continue to work with them on helping the survivors to rebuild effectively with a licensed contractor. That would conclude my wildfire update. And next up would be hiring a consultant to help us determine the appropriate classification to install energy storage systems. I'm pleased to report that what you'll find on page 35 is an overview of the process. But I'm pleased to report that we have completed the two-phase evaluation process that consisted of reviewing technical written proposals and the second evaluation phase of oral interviews. Today, the Department of Consumer Affairs is assessing the cost component score. And it's our understanding that the Department of Consumer Affairs will post a required notice of intent to award tomorrow for 5 business days. So we'll make sure that we put that on our website with our solar and our solar tab, our solar part of the site, but just so everybody's aware of that. But again, it should be posted tomorrow. It will be available for 5 days. And then finally, an update on our next board meetings. We are proposing to have committee meetings the week of November 2nd. Felice will send out a doodle poll to gauge your availability. The next quarterly board meeting is tentatively scheduled for the week of December the 7th. And again, Felice will send a doodle poll out. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the 3 updates.
Thank you, David. Is there any board comment? Questions? Hearing none. Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comments on these items.
So this was just it was informational. Next is agenda item D4, the administration update, which begins on page 51 of your packet. I will turn it over to Michelle Meliza, Administration Chief, to provide a brief update.
Yes, this is Mike Meliza. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members of the board. I will begin the Administration Division update with the personnel update starting on page 51 of your board packet. So with the personnel update during the 4th quarter of fiscal year 19-20, CSLB personnel staff completed 13 personnel transactions. This included the addition of 2 new employees from other state agencies and 1 employee new to state service. Within CSLB, 5 employees were promoted and 2 transferred to different units. 1 student assistant and 2 examination proctors were also hired. You can see in charts on the bottom of page 51 for statistics that compare with previous fiscal years. We'll move on to page 52, and I want to highlight the reclassification of enforcement representative series to our investigation classification series. So as part of the 2019-20 strategic plan, the board requested that staff research a special investigator classification series. In November 2019, a classification study performed by CPS HR Consulting recommended utilization of the special investigator classification. CSLB adopted the recommendations and worked with DCA on a formal plan to transition. CalHR approved CSLB's plan, which became effective on July 1st, 2020. So the use of special investigators classification will allow CSLB to effectively compete with other state agencies for most suitable and qualified candidates to fill enforcement division vacancies. So currently personnel staff are in the process of transitioning 142 enforcement division employees into the new special investigator classification. So it's a very positive development for our enforcement division. We'll move now to our business services update beginning on page 55. All of our facilities developments are on target and everything's looking good there. But I do want to highlight on the bottom of page 55 procurements and process. So in light of budget constraints, all purchases continue to be closely scrutinized and only mission critical items are processed. However, we're focusing on our COVID-related PPP items. We're working hard to procure these items, which include masks, gloves, sanitizers, as they become available from our supply sources, which can be tough at times, so staff is working very hard in procuring those items. So it's very high on our radar. So that concludes my report for the Administration Division. If you have any questions, I can answer those now. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, this is Kevin Albanese. Just a quick question on the procurement of the PPE and whatnot. Is it like every agency on its own, or is the state helping coordinate a unified effort to acquire PPE?
There is some coordination, but it's very tough right now. All vendors and, even the folks that are coordinating with through the state, it's just tough to get supplies. It's getting easier. And everything is, we just try to prioritize everything, and the state is as well. So, but things are improving. We are getting more, it's easier for the staff to procure these items, but some of the things are just still delayed. So we just keep looking for new sources. Hope that answers your question.
It does. I guess my question is, are we basically competing with other agencies, other state agencies, to get PPE?
At some level, yes. Everyone's just trying to get their items.
That's disappointing.
Any other board comment? I want to apologize. Thank you, Mike, for your report. I do want to apologize for not for mispronouncing your name. Again, we're working remotely with no visual, so please bear with me. Hearing no other board comment, Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comment on this item.
Okay. Next is the Information Technology Administration update, which begins on page 57 of your packet. I will turn it over to Jason Perez, Information Technology Chief, to provide a brief update. Jason.
Thank you, Board Chair, and good morning, everyone. On page 57 begins the Information Technology update. The IT division continues to show cost savings. A few of the highlights are an approximate 40% reduction to the Department of Technology charges between fiscal years 18-19 and 19-20. This ongoing savings is important as there will be additional cost as we move to increase IT functionality and automation of processes. I'm going to move past the online renewal update for a moment and continue with highlighting cost-saving measures with the information security and risk on page 58. CSLB IT continues to partner with the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Information Systems in developing a shared IT services model. This model will allow CSLB to share major IT infrastructure costs versus CSLB implementing its own IT solutions. The initial phase of the shared services models includes network infrastructure and security services. CSLB IT is working on remediation efforts with DCA Security on the military audit conducted in February of 2019. Some of our remediation efforts were delayed due to transition of staff resources to assist CSLB employees with working remotely. IT staff efforts will now shift to remediations of these outlined tasks in preparation of our next military audit scheduled for March of 2021. Next, I will move back to the online renewal, which is noted on page 57. CSLB implemented online renewals in April of 2020. Online renewals continue to be a big success for CSLB, and it allows for 100% of our licensees to pay their renewal online. At this time, over 50% of the renewal payments are processed online. Through end of August, we have processed 22,756 online renewal transactions. Continuing to page 60 is a Gantt chart of IT projects for 2020. To finish off the remainder of 2020, IT development staff are working with our enforcement division with the goal to provide licensees the ability to pay citations online. We anticipate completing this in late December of 2020. After implementation of the online citations, IT will then turn its focus on the implementations of the few of the legislative changes. At this time, we are in the pre-planning phases for 2 bills. One, outsourcing of exam administration, and the second is the retroactive renewal. This concludes my IT updates.
Thank you, Jason. This was informational only. Is there any board comment? Hearing none. Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comment on this item.
Very well then. Next is agenda item D5, the 2019-2021 strategic plan update, which begins on page 61 of your board packet. Tanya, please update the board.
Thank you, David. So today we're providing you the 2019 through 2021 strategic plan objectives, where we're just requesting a revised target date for completion. Those objectives are outlined on page 64 through 69 of your board packet. And each objective shows the current target date that was set by the board back in 2018, and highlighted are our new proposed target dates. And some of those dates are also being requested to be changed to ongoing when it lends itself to ongoing activities and not really a hard completion date. So as David mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has affected our daily operations, which currently equates to about 25% reduction in available staff and staff work hours. And so unfortunately, work on these objectives has slowed. So today we would just ask for the board's consideration in approving these proposed target dates. Division chiefs will update their respective committee members at the next committee meetings, and they're also available to answer any questions on their division objectives. So that completes my update. Turn it back over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Are there any comments? At this time, I will entertain a motion.
So moved to adopt the recommendations.
Augie Beltran, second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Any comments? Rick, are there any public comments?
No public comments on this item.
Felice, can you take roll call?
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Paula Richardson,
Aye.
Jim Wayne,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer, Nancy, absent. Mary Tucker,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you, Felice. On page 69, you will find the staff recommendation, which asks the board to approve the proposed 2019-2000. Never mind. Let's see. We move to agenda item E, the enforcement portion of our agenda, which begins on page 75. I will now turn it over to Enforcement Committee Chair Kevin Albanese and Deputy Chief Enforcement Jesse Flores.
Thank you, Chair. If everybody wants to turn to page 75 of your packet, that begins the enforcement program update. I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief of Enforcement Jesse Flores to provide a summary of the implementation of the expense reduction strategies and a vacancy update. Jesse, you're on.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, on page 75 of your packet begins the enforcement program update. And at the top of the page is listed the board approved expense reduction strategy. And I'd like to mention a couple of those. For the AG's office, I'm happy to report that we were able to come in under that monthly $580,000 for July. This is just a collaborative effort between our enforcement case management staff and the AG's office by identifying opportunities to not only save costs, but resolve matters quickly, which benefits all parties. Moving on to arbitrations, while there is not sufficient amount of time to compare data to measure arbitration costs, I will mention that compared to this time last fiscal year, we have noticed a reduction in arbitration costs. If this pattern continues, we will have the savings we are seeking. However, if we do notice a spike, we will implement processes that will keep us on track. Additionally, at the June 5th meeting, the board approved process changes by which complaints with a financial injury of under $10,000 are referred to the bond or small claims. On page 76, you can read the notice that is on our website informing the public of this process. We have already seen unhappy responses, as you probably heard earlier in public comment, but we've also received written ones of not happy with what we're doing with some of these, with what we're doing with this process. We have created an action code that will allow us to monitor and track and report to future meetings. As for staffing, Dave mentioned the number of vacancies, but I will let you know that we are continuously looking to identify priorities and filling certain vacancies and ensure that we are meeting our critical public protection mandate. And finally, my enforcement management team are developing working comprehensive training for our staff, considering COVID and all the challenges that imposes with webinars with the Attorney General's office. We have live WebEx, Zoom meetings with other staff to identify training needs, and in-office training for onboarding new employees who have just been hired. So that, Kevin, concludes my enforcement update.
Wonderful, Jesse. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the enforcement team working under these current conditions and cuts. Back to the board book, starting at page 76, there's a few investigative highlights that I'd like to call your attention to. First, it's important to understand our enforcement program serves a vital role in protecting the public when they are most vulnerable, such as during the time following the event of a natural disaster, whether it be earthquake or, as we're dealing with now, fire. This was demonstrated during the investigation at Chiramonte Construction and Plumbing of Tulare for defrauding survivors of the 2017 Tubbs fire that devastated parts of Santa Rosa and Sonoma counties. This licensee, Mr. Chiramonte, his wife and daughter entered into multiple contracts, took large dollars in advance of work being performed, and performed little or no work. The estimated financial injury was approximately $1 million, and the Sonoma County DA's office is still to this day reporting that they are receiving calls from potential victims. The district attorney in Sonoma County has filed nearly 60 criminal charges in this case. Kudos to our peace officers who took the lead role in this investigation and effectively partnered with local prosecutors. On page 77, you find the summary of CSLB's and Alameda County DA's office investigation that resulted in the revocation of Roto Hero Plumbing, their license. CSLB receives leads and complaints from consumers, industry members, and even board members. In the spirit of protecting the integrity of the construction industry, we also recognize that most contractors are doing a great job. However, in this case against Roto Hero, the investigation revealed that they were taking advantage of some of California's most vulnerable homeowners by misleading them into signing contracts for repairs that were not even necessary to begin with. Our enforcement division, in partnership with local prosecutors, took 6 administrative actions, identifying a total financial injury in excess of $125,000. And on July 31st, 2020, Roto Hero's license was revoked. This all is informational only at this time. There is no action required by the board. Before I ask for any further board comment, I just want to reflect back to the Chico meeting that we did last year with the fire. People had the opportunity to tour Paradise. We're dealing with these natural disasters again. And as board members, I just ask that we always remember why we're here. We're here for the consumer, and we're here to protect the consumer, and especially the most vulnerable. And these fires in most everybody's backyard, it seems they're not discriminating where they are. Notwithstanding the lack of resources, notwithstanding COVID, our efforts and our job could not be more important than now. Is there any board comment? Hearing no board comment, is there any public comment, Rick?
No comment on this item.
Okay, all right, moving on to page 85, the Solar Task Force update. This agenda item highlights the continued partnership between the CSLB, the California Public Utilities Commission, and Department of Business Oversight in combating fraud in the residential solar industry. This details some of the enforcement strategies employed by CSLB in this unique industry. At this time, I would like to turn this over to Registrar Fote to provide some additional insight. Mr. Registrar.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Just a real quick update on what we've been working on with the Public Utility Commission, specifically Commissioner Martha Guzman Chavez and the Business Oversight Commission, and that commissioner is Manuel Alvarez. We've had a strategy to reduce consumer complaints. That strategy, as of at this time, hasn't been as successful as we hoped. We're still receiving 90, on average, 90 consumer filed solar complaints monthly. On a positive note, last fiscal year, that being July 1st through June 31st of 2020, we were able to settle 176 solar licensee complaints. That resulted in $2.4 million in restitution. Unfortunately, we were not able to settle all complaints, and 122 solar complaints were referred to either administrative legal action or criminal prosecution. And what you see on those type of referrals is that consumers are not always made whole. And what's troubling is that we do have solar contractors that are writing home improvement contracts. If solar is being installed on a residence, the contract must comply with home improvement contract requirements. That means your down payment is limited to $1,000. Any subsequent payments have to be directly referenced to the value of work performed. Unfortunately, some solar contractors have developed a payment schedule. They call it the CAP payment schedule. It's consumer approved plan. And that means that once the consumer approves the plans, they'll try to receive, and many times do receive, up to 80% of the contract price. And this can create a significant problem when the contractor doesn't perform the work, maybe files bankruptcy or just simply abandons jobs. And it's caused a lot of consumers to be financially harmed. What you will find in your packet is an overview of a program that we're working with the PUC on to review the interconnection packets. So when a contractor is hooking up to the grid, they have to submit contract documents that include the notice requirements to confirm that they are licensed, the salesperson is registered to the utility before that connection is made. We reviewed, I think it was 157 of those packets, and we found that 90% of the contracts didn't comply with home improvement contract law. Quite staggering. So this industry is unique in a couple ways. We're seeing widespread front loading of contracts, taking excessive deposits, and also lenders in some situations are paying directly to the contractor. You don't see that in other home improvement contracts. That's causing a lot of harm to consumers. So how best to help these consumers, many of whom have liens on their house, they've paid out $20,000 or $30,000, they don't have a solar system, contractor can't be found. Well, the PUC is looking at a program, that's why I appreciate the opportunity to present this today, whereby they would create a residential recovery fund. It's modeled after the recovery fund in Nevada. And it would be based upon assessments made when you hook up to the electrical grid. That's how the fund would be created. It would pay out when the board has taken a final action. I mean, we've written a citation, we filed an accusation, we've taken a legal action against the contractor, and that legal action has an order of correction that's not been complied with. At that point, the fund could provide restitution to consumers. This is a PUC-sponsored measure. It's not one that I'm bringing to you to sponsor in any way. I just want to make sure that you're aware that as staff, we are providing information to the PUC in furtherance of them establishing the Solar Residential Recovery Fund. So Kevin, that would be my update. And if there's any questions?
Are there any board questions or comments? I don't think I see any. Rick, do we have any public question or comments?
No comments on this item.
All right. Moving forward, on page 89 of your packet begins the content, including the workers' compensation insurance statistics, enforcement strategies, and ultimately CSLB's legislative proposal for mandated workers' compensation. As background, in 2017, the board established a two-person advisory committee which consisted of former member Ed Lang and myself to develop strategies to address workers' compensation insurance avoidance, which involved collaborating with other industries, increasing enforcement, and discussing legislative solutions. CSLB conducted several meetings between 2018 and 2020 with State Compensation Insurance Fund, California Department of Insurance, and various construction industry stakeholders to discuss solutions to this problem. Yet, despite our efforts, the number of workers' compensation exemptions on file remained consistent. As a result, we are seeking legislation to mandate workers' compensation for specific license classifications to protect workers and consumers as part of the board-approved 2019 to 2021 strategic plan. At a January 2020 meeting of industry, CSLB staff and two members of the board's current Workers' Comp Advisory Committee, staff presented a proposal to mandate workers' compensation insurance for three classifications likely to have employees. These were the C8 concrete contractor, the C20 HVAC contractor, and the D49 tree service contractors. Representatives of these industries were present at the meeting and supported the measure going forward. If you turn to page 100, there is a potential fiscal impact of mandating workers' compensation insurance broken out. Based on the data acquired after the implementation of mandatory workers' compensation insurance for roofing contractors, we can assume 10% of licensees may not obtain licensure if all classifications are mandated to carry this coverage. Additionally, on page 101, you see the estimated cost to licensees in premium. Of course, there will be a cost to licensees when procuring workers' compensation, but this is not a new cost of doing business and frankly should have been being paid all along by contractors as required by California law. If the board approves the Workers' Compensation Advisory Committee's recommendation, the legislative process will begin with Chief of Leg Mike J. seeking an author for the bill as laid out in pages 103 to 107 of your packet. If all goes as planned, the bill would move through the legislature and finally to the governor's desk for signature and implementation on January 1, 2022. The Workers' Compensation Advisory Committee's recommendation is to recommend that the full board direct staff to pursue legislation that would immediately require workers' compensation insurance for C8 contractors, C8 concrete contractors, C20 HVAC contractors, and D49 tree service contractors, and then within 3 years require workers' compensation for every actively licensed contractor. So that is the recommendation. That do we need a motion for that, or does it come as a fully formed motion from the two-person committee?
That's Dave Foe. Jason Hurtado, could you comment on that?
Either way, can I get a motion? Is there a motion from
Augie Beltran? I so move the recommendation of the committee.
Jim Wayne, second.
Okay, so we have a motion and second. Before calling for a vote, is there any board comment to the proposal? Rick, is there any public comment
to the
proposal?
Excuse me, we just had one. We do have one public comment. Phil Vermeulen, please go ahead with your comment. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. This is Phil Vermeulen, representing Contractor Licensing Center and the Flasher Barricade Association. This is something that's been near and dear to my heart for years. I think it is long overdue, and I enthusiastically applaud the board and urge everybody to vote aye for this measure, and in 3 years go forward with requiring workers' comp for everyone. It's long overdue. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chair, no other public comments. We do notice that we believe Frank Altamora, a board member, does have his hand up as well.
Yeah, having joined the board fairly recently, I'm wondering if staff could provide some light on why there was an original exemption for contractors who did not have employees.
Well, this is Dave Fote. Mike Chemnesky, have you ever looked into the alleged history on the ability to file an exemption from workers' comp? Mike Chemnesky is a bit of our historian here.
Yes, I went back to the very beginning on all of these statutes, and all I can say is that it was always there. The rule has always been that if you have employees, regardless of CSLB completely aside, as Kevin mentioned, the law is if you have employees, you have to have workers' comp, end of story. What has always been authorized at CSLB is if a licensee is certifying, which is a promise on a document, on a form, if the licensee is certifying to the registrar that they do not have any employees, they are therefore exempt from workers' compensation coverage in California. That is what has always been authorized to be provided. The licensee could always promise to the board that they don't have employees. But what this document and this packet explains is that year after year after year after year, approximately 55% of licensed contractors claim they do not have employees. And our research efforts and our enforcement efforts have indicated that is probably not entirely accurate. But to answer your question, Mr. Altamira, is that it's always been there that you could promise to the board that you do not have employees. And that would be what this proposal would do in a number of years. It would be to not allow licensees to make that promise anymore.
Okay, and just and that one of the audits that were performed, it looked about maybe estimated half of that within certain classifications maybe were not accurately reporting the situation. So am I interpreting correctly that, roughly 25% of our contractor base does have a valid exemption?
Well, that's correct that they filed the exemption, and the study though determined that a certain number of them had filed a false exemption. It's not to be, we don't want to say that there's others within the study that did also a false exemption. It's just that we had to determine that they in fact did have employees. And that can be challenging unless you spend a lot of resources doing so. We did that by looking at their website, by talking to these contractors, by also going out to their job sites and determining for ourselves that they had workers.
Okay, I guess my concern there was, despite all that, there is still a large part of our contracting population that seems to be complying with all the laws that would be affected by this.
To answer your question, yeah, there is an unknown number of contractors who legitimately do not have employees. I don't know that we have that number. I don't know that would be difficult to obtain by looking at the exemptions.
To Board Member Altamira, I would just submit that there are some likely single person, sole proprietors going out doing some of the minor work that's out there. Just in my observations, especially in the classes that have been identified, there's none that I've seen the ability to pour any concrete with just one person as a C8 contractor. Never seen a one-person crew cutting down trees or doing HVAC, and that was in large part from the former board member, Mr. Diaz, his assistance in developing that C20 HVAC. So there are some, but I would be remiss to suggest that it's 25%. Those are just the ones that we haven't been able to catch in the process.
Mr. Albanese, I do have a member of the public would like to comment. JP Tenore, please go ahead with your comments for 3 minutes.
Well, before we do that, Frank,
yes,
did that answer your question or address your concern, or?
It addressed some of them. I guess in general, just while I have the floor, it just seemed like there were a lot of negatives. One, that seemed like the legislation didn't achieve its original goals. It seems like this is going to have a pretty significant reduction on the licensee population. drive more folks to the underground economy, which I know has been a concern. There's some obvious benefits to consumer protection. I guess I'm just unsure of how those items weigh out.
And I guess the only thing that I would suggest is, and certainly the other board members can comment, is if they're working with employees and don't have workers' compensation insurance, they're already working underground. And what's discouraging about that is that they're working underground under the appearance of not being underground and under the appearance of the legitimacy of a contractor's license when it's because they've falsified that exemption.
Mr. Albanese, would it be appropriate at this time to have a public comment?
Sure. Is that you good, Frank?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, yes. Thank you. We do have a member of the public, JP Tenori. Please go ahead with your comments.
Now, I'm wondering why in the world would you not have workers' comp when it's so cheap and so inexpensive? There's pay-as-you-go programs, and the ones that are not pay-as-you-go, you can get them as little as $500. I never listed my workers' comp just simply because it was in case it got switched or something was too much headache to update it. But I have workers' comp through the Hartford, and it can't be it's the most easiest process imaginable, and it's inexpensive, and a lot of people cheat and they independent contractor their employees. I don't. But I want to strongly encourage, for operations and stuff like that, it is so inexpensive to get. You should positively, definitely mandate workers' comp. There's no reason why not.
Okay, thank you for your comment. We do have one more member of the public that would like to comment as well. Greg Chick, please go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, thank you for the time and opportunity here. As a sole proprietor plumbing contractor who does service and repair work only, I do in fact do all my own work, and I never hire any help. And I haven't for decades. It takes restraint at times, but I do my own work. There is a way possibly to if you want to say, honor such a position as mine. And maybe if there was an online thing sent to people such as me monthly, a little statement. I hereby proclaim I do not hire anyone as a monthly reminder to people who otherwise might be tempted to, cheat the workman's comp thing, or some other creative idea such as that isn't going to be a burden on the CSLB to keep the honest people honest. There could be a task group set up to vet any possibilities and therefore avoid any, as some would say, big government imposition put on us people. I'm retiring, so myself, I don't care. I just care as an industry professional. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. We do have another public comment from Richard Markison. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, board members. Richard Markson on behalf of the Western Electrical Contractors Association, the Plumbing Heating Contractors of California. We certainly support the effort, but to the previous comments from the sole practitioner, yeah, we're certainly sensitive to that. There are instances, if you are a sole practitioner and you have other forms of health insurance, the workers' compensation insurance may be redundant, may be duplicative, and so there could be legitimate reasons. Certainly, neither of my clients countenance or support the situations that have been described where contractors are either involved in cash pay or are not covering their employees, but a true sole practitioner may end up and may believe that it is duplicative coverage that offers no value. That said, WICA and PHCC both support this effort for the industry. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We see that Phil Vermeulen's hand's still up. I'm not sure if that's from a previous one or not. Phil, did you have another comment to make?
Sorry, I thought I had turned it off. I apologize.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, we do, if it's appropriate, we do have one other comment. One person who did comment before would like to add something. JP Tenori, if you can just please keep this comment short.
Okay. Basically, I haven't had any employees for several months out of this year. And I don't mind paying the Hartford, I think they debited $16 and something cents just to keep the policy active. And I'm not really, like the purpose of building a company is to not necessarily just be a one-man show. And there's a lot of people who take advantage of it. And I say the cost outweighs the benefit outweighs the cost of actually having workers' comp. So you can get it as low as like $50 a month, or sometimes $500 at most. And for the level of work that you have to do, it's there's license fees and stuff like that. It's just the cost of doing business, and to protect the people that are working, to protect the homeowners, because they're liable if they don't have workers' comp if someone gets hurt on their property and stuff. So I positively strongly support having workers' comp.
All right, thank you very much. No other public comments at this point.
All right, if there's no other public comments or board comments, I will turn it over to Felice, and please call roll on the motion.
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Aye.
Lucky Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giarratano,
Aye.
Susan Granzello,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Marla Richardson,
Aye.
Jim Mullane,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Aye.
Mary Teichert.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Outstanding. That concludes, on a very positive note, the Enforcement Committee update. Thank you, everybody. So I turn it back over to Chair Delatorre.
Thank you, Kevin, Tracy, and Dave for your updated reports. As Kevin said, that concludes the enforcement section of the agenda. We move to agenda item F, the licensing and testing portion of our agenda, which begins on page 113. I turn it over to Licensing Committee Chair Jim Rain and Licensing Chief Justin Pata.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning, board. You can find, as David said, the licensing update on page 113. I will highlight a few items for the board. Regarding applications, in the early months of the pandemic, new applications were low. They are now increasing but remain below 2019 levels. Please note that processing times are increasing due to the number of vacancies and many licensing staff working part-time to assist their children with distance learning. Regarding renewals, our licensed population is holding relatively steady, and the division recently hired 2 new staff to process renewal applications. Although processing times early in the pandemic were high, they are continuing to decrease and are holding between 2 and 3 weeks at present. Our total number of renewals received still remains high each month despite the pandemic. And finally, the call center is where the division was most impacted. Call wait times remain high, but IT staff along with the division are finalizing a means for staff to answer the phone while teleworking. This is anticipated to go into effect October 1st and is expected to return call center wait times to pre-pandemic norms. In other words, we are striving to return to when the average wait time for a caller was under 6 minutes. Staff continues to promptly answer emails sent to the CSLB licensing staff, and I'm happy to report that those are still being consistently answered within 24 hours. You can find the testing update on page 129. As previously discussed, on June 15th, staff reopened 7 of its 8 test centers. At the time, there were over 10,000 exams scheduled. By operating most test centers after hours, I am happy to report that the total number of pending exams is now below 7,000. For reference, during normal operations, CSLB usually has 4,500 pending exams at any given time, and the plan is to further reduce pending applications to less than 4,500 by the end of the year. For the public listening today, if an applicant has an exam scheduled and they would like to try to take their exam sooner, please email exams@cslb.ca.gov. Staff are often able to find earlier test dates if applicants are willing to go to a different test facility than the one they were assigned to. And finally, in September, the Exam Development Unit is beginning to hold remote workshops to continue occupational analysis work for the updating existing exams. On page 130, you can see the exam staff are currently working on. Staff will also begin work on developing the new residential remodeling contractor exam. That concludes the licensing and testing update, and Justin is available if the board has any questions. Do board members have any questions or comments? Okay, Rick, does anyone from the public have any comments?
No public comments on this item.
All right, thank you. Next item is the review of the internal policy and procedure changes related to license application review. You can find the information on page 135 for the internal policy and procedure changes related to license application review. CSLB currently reviews the stated experience in 3% of the applications it receives. At different times in the board's history, the licensing and enforcement divisions have performed this function. But recently, the licensing division has conducted these reviews, but due to the pandemic, the division redirected these staff to work on more complex applications and referred these reviews to the enforcement division. Management is tracking how this is working, and after operations return to normal, it will present to the board on whether this function should remain in licensing or instead, once again, be performed by the enforcement division. Any comments or questions from the board? Rick, anyone from the public?
No comments.
Okay. Our next item is an action item, review, discussion, and possible action on canceling the CSLB license reciprocity agreement with Utah. Moving to item 4 is the review of the CSLB licensing reciprocity agreement with Utah. You can find this item on page 139. At our previous meeting with the Nevada board, CSLB discovered that the Nevada board removed Utah from its licensure and endorsement program on April 16, 2020. This was due to legislation passed in Utah. Board member Frank Altamura asked staff to look into this matter. And Justin, can you please share what staff found?
Thank you, Jim. This is Justin. So just by way of background, to honor reciprocity with any given state, we're charged under Business and Professions Code 7065.4 to essentially evaluate whether the licensure requirements of that state are the same or greater as what's required in California. So with that in mind, in 2019, Utah passed House Bill 187, which eliminated the trade exam requirement for general contractors, general engineering contractors, and specialty contractors. So no more trade exams for any type of contractor's license in Utah. And then in 2020, they actually passed some additional legislation, which was, I believe it's Senate Bill 23, and that actually allows contractors, as long as they have a licensing in good standing for 1 year in another state, then they're able to get a license in Utah. And just by way of background, when it comes to reciprocity, we're looking at 5 years good standing in another state. That's just a brief summary. Happy to go into more detail if anyone has questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Justin? Okay, based on the Nevada board's actions and what staff researched, I would like to ask the board to consider the following motion. Direct staff to rescind its license reciprocity agreement with the state of Utah. Would someone like to make a motion and a second?
This is Johnny. I would make that motion.
Second, this is Susan.
Yep, motion and a second. Is there anything on the question? Any board comment? Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comment on this motion.
Thank you. Felice, will you please call the roll?
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamura,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzola,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Paula Richardson,
Aye.
Jimmy Wayne, Jim,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Yes.
Mary Tykert.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next is item number 5, the possible action to initiate rulemaking to establish criteria for expediting review of license applications. And you can find this item on page 143. Recently, staff reviewed policies associated with expediting applications. In other words, when staff takes an application out of the order it was received and processes it immediately. In their review, staff uncovered an issue and would like to make a proposal to the board. Justin?
Thank you, Jim. Just briefly, under Business and Professions Code, Section 7137, the board has been authorized by regulation to allow for the expedites of applications. Unfortunately, when we were doing our research, I just realized that we actually don't have any regulations. We do have an internal policy, and I just wanted to briefly summarize that policy for the board. And what staff will be doing next, without objection, would be just putting a regulatory package together for review at the licensing committee in early November, and then we would present to the full board if there wasn't disagreement in December. And what we would be doing is just writing reg language to this effect, which is our existing policy. We expedite any application, which means when it actually comes in the door, we're going to move you to the front of the line if you meet one of these criteria. The first is you're attempting to perform work in a declared disaster area. A classic example that was raised on the call already, City of Paradise. A second one is if you're trying to work on any energy conservation project or any work with a public utility, whether that's an investor-owned utility or a privately owned utility. And then last but not least, and the one that's most common that I see on a regular basis each week, would be if you're trying to perform work on a public contract. So that's just a brief summary of what we're looking to do. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay. The board does not need to take any formal position at this time, but staff is asking for any feedback we may have. In the coming weeks, they will prepare draft regulatory language based on the existing policy and our feedback, and we'll present that language to the licensing and legislative committees in October. With that, do board members have any questions or comments? Rick, anything from the public?
First, it appears Frank Altamore just raised his hand. He may have a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm wondering if staff might be able to clarify why this needs to be formalized.
At present, and I'll be a little bit soft with my language, Jason may want to step in. I just determined that while we're implementing this policy, we actually have a state law that's seeking that we have such a policy and regulation. So I just want to make sure we're adhering with state law. Jason Hurtado, is there anything you'd want to add on that point?
Yeah.
I assume he may be having technical issues, but if I get a text from him, I'll let you know. But otherwise, essentially, what we're attempting to do here is just making sure we're adhering with our statute.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, sorry, Jason.
Oh, so sorry about that. I'm having some difficulty. So I think, as you mentioned earlier, it is sort of statutorily required, I think, under 7137, that if we're going to expedite these, it's sort of best to implement this through the promulgation of regulations. So I think that's probably the proper course of action here going forward.
Anybody from the public?
First of all, it appears that Miguel Galarza has a comment as well, board member.
Yes, question to staff. Does that apply to new licenses for public works, or is that for additional classifications and or for both?
You're correct on the last item. It's for both. So it could be, I would say the most common when it comes to public works is an ag class, just because somebody changed the bid, but I also see new applications quite frequently. So it's for both.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we do have a couple of comments from the public. First, JP Tenor has a comment. Stand by just 1 second. And Okay, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just making a comment that it's all declared a disaster area right now. Does that count as a disaster area with respect to the first point? I don't know. That's not really a relevant thing right now, but technically it's all disaster area.
It's actually a formalized process that can be done under two circumstances. I don't want to go into too much down the rabbit hole, but a FEMA declared disaster area or something declared as a disaster by the governor of California.
I think we have one other public comment from Phil Vermeulen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Phil Vermeulen, representing Contractor Licensing Center and Flasher Barricade Association. This is something that I have a lot of experience with, and there are these extenuating circumstances when an application has to be processed more quickly. I should also point out that the Secretary of State has an expedite process for $350. They will put you and process your incorporation within 24 hours. It makes lots of good sense with the Contractors Board being in such a bad financial straits now. It's another opportunity to make some money and assist those companies that are willing to front the additional funds to help to get the thing processed more quickly. Again, it's just good business practice, and I would strongly urge this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that our legal counsel, Jason Hurtado, has his hand up.
Oh, just a quick question for Justin. So with respect to the military families under Business and Professions Code section, I think 115.4 and 115.5, will this proposal also incorporate sort of those statutory requirements to expedite as well? Or is that something that staff is looking sort of later on down the line?
That's actually a great dovetail to Phil Vermeulen's comment as well. My understanding, based on conversations with several folks, are the military expedites aren't necessary in these regulations because we essentially execute that per statute already. So I wasn't planning to add that language, but based on conversations I can have with Jason offline, if that's necessary, I'm happy to add that to the regulatory language. And then in addition to that, with regard to Phil Vermeulen's comment, when it comes to expediting by paying a fee, that's certainly something we're looking into at the staff level. That also would require a statutory change. So we're actually looping in that discussion into our fee study. Hopefully that answers questions.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no other public comments at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. There's no action here. We're looking forward to the preparation of the draft regulatory language at one of our future meetings. Our last item is review and discussion regarding strategies to increase licensure. This is our last item on the licensing agenda. As the new chair of the licensing committee, I have met with staff, and one priority you will see from me in the coming year is to increase the presence of women in construction. According to the National Association of Women in Construction, women make up less than 10% of our industry, and nearly a third of those women are in sales or administrative support roles. I have asked CSLB staff to provide information and support to construction groups with programs to recruit women into the construction industry, and I have requested staff to begin tracking applicants where they can to see if there are any barriers to licensure for women that we can examine and eliminate. One area where I've asked staff to assist is in our licensing workshops. This is an opportunity for staff to interact with applicants at a crucial time in a person's career. Both Justin and Rick will be looking for ways to identify participants in these workshops through their names and possible notations on their applications to track their progress through the application process. Rick will discuss those workshops in more detail in the public affairs agenda. Any comments or questions from board members? Anything from the public?
I think that's fantastic, Jim. You got my full support.
No public comments at this point.
Thank you. This concludes the licensing items on the agenda. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jim and Justin. Moving on, we move over to agenda item G, the Public Affairs Program Update, which begins on page 151. I turn it over to Public Affairs Committee Chair Diana Love and Public Affairs Chief Rick Lopes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone. Again, my name is Diana Love. I am the board's public member who is also a representative of a statewide senior citizens organization. I am also serving this year as the chair of the Public Affairs Committee. I'm happy to be joining you today from Palmdale in northern Los Angeles County to report on our public affairs activities over the past few months. Our report starts on page 151 in your meeting packet, as the chair indicated. First, in the staffing area, I want to report that Jane Kreidler, our longtime outreach coordinator, has left the board. Jane has accepted a promotion and is now working as a supervisor for the California Architects Board. Over the years, Jane worked for many of the board members who participated in our highly successful Senior Scam Stopper program. She was a tireless worker who averaged being on the road a couple of days per week, traveling all over the state. Not only did Jane's work directly help the thousands of seniors who attended the Senior Scam Stopper seminars, she also was a great ambassador to build relationships with legislators we partnered with to conduct those seminars. Those relationships have truly benefited the board. With our current budget situation and the COVID-19 pandemic precluding in-person Senior Scam Stoppers, Jane's position is not being filled at this time. Our public affairs staff is looking for opportunities to continue working with legislators to hold virtual seminars and to have been involved in a couple of others over the past few weeks. I would also like to highlight some of our public affairs work online, including through our website and social media channels. At the bottom of page 151, you can see a list of our live and recorded webcasts. The Public Affairs Office spearheaded and produces a monthly live interactive online workshop for those interested in getting a California contractor's license. The workshop is called Get Licensed to Build. We would like to thank our current board chair, David Delatorre, whose picture you will see on page 152, and last year's chair, Johnny Simpson, for joining us during a couple of the workshops and offered a welcome greeting to attendees. The workshops take place on the first Monday of each month. We have conducted 5 workshops so far, with more than 200 in attendance each time. About 220 people attended this past Friday's workshop. Our public affairs staff also is involved with licensing and enforcement to develop a Spanish language workshop. The goal is to have that ready to launch before the end of the year. Next, on pages 152 and 153, you can see details on new videos our public affairs staff have produced. They include a video on what licensed applicants can expect on their test day. That video takes applicants through the testing process and explains the safety measure we have in place because of COVID-19. We have also produced a new video on disaster rebuilding that's being used on our social media channels. The public affairs staff have also given a new look on the video on our website and to our YouTube channel. I would invite members to check those out if you have not already had a chance. We think the page is more user-friendly, visual, and engaging, and easier to search for and locate specific videos. With the COVID-19 pandemic, our full-time public affairs staff are working remotely. So the new digital media center you see on page 153 is being used sparingly right now. Next week, staff will be there to shoot a segment for a video being produced by Assembly Speaker Anthony Brendan's office. We also want to note that some of the equipment recently purchased is being put to good use, being used for a number of telework projects, including the live webcast of this meeting, as well as our applicant workshop. And for audio podcasts, our staff has begun working on. On page 154 of the meeting packet, outlines our social media highlights. As you can imagine, a lot of posts have been in regard to COVID-19 and available CSLB services. Not noted here, but over the past few weeks, we have had a lot of social media posts on wildfires, our excessive heat, and unhealthy air. The focus has been on consumer protection and worker safety. You can also see the additional information on our social media efforts up through page 160. With the pandemic, one area that has slowed down for public affairs is work with the media. Staff reports a scattered number of calls, but the volume has dropped significantly. On pages 161 and 162, you can see a list of graphics and publication projects completed by our public affairs staff. That is followed by our outreach report, including a list of senior scammer seminars I referred to earlier. Finally, we will work on our employee intranet site and a weekly staff briefing and will be sent out to all employees at the start of each work week. Certainly, this is a busy time for our public affairs staff. I am sure you all join me in thanking them for their continued hard work, especially over the challenging times we have all gone through over the past 6 months. Since this is an informational item, no action is required of the board. At this time, is there any board comment? Seeing no board comment.
Chair,
Rick, is
excuse me,
there
because it looks like Kevin Albanese has his hand up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If it's appropriate to do, I'm not sure if we could take action or if we need to agendize it, but Jane Kreidler did an absolutely fantastic job for this board. She was the face of this board to countless senior citizens, some people most vulnerable in our communities. She had a fantastic relationship with most of the with all the legislators that I've seen her with. I think it'd be appropriate to recognize her with some sort of commendation or, certificate of gratitude. I'm not sure what the best way to do that, but if it's appropriate to do that as a motion, I would love to do that and recognize her somehow at the next meeting. If we need to agendize that and discuss it in compliance with the BAG-Keenly, then I would ask that we do that.
Okay,
It
thank
could
you.
be considered as an agenda item.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any more public comment, Rick?
No public comments, but if you don't mind, Madam Chair, I'd like to just to let the board know, since they did bring it up during licensing about the outreach to women in contracting, we did do that during our workshop that we conducted last Friday, and asked a number of women who contacted us if they would like to be contacted in the future. And we probably had contact with probably about a dozen folks that said they would like more information and would be willing to discuss what they feel like their needs are to see if there's some kind of a void that we can help out with. So I just wanted to add that for the board's information. As far as public comment, no other comments.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, that concludes the Public Affairs Program update.
Thank you, Diane and Rick. And before we move on, I would only ask Rick if we could post a more flattering picture of me. Moving forward, we move to agenda item H, the legislation update, which begins on page 169. I now turn it over to Augie Beltran, Legislation Committee Chair, and Mike Chemnensky, Chief of Legislation.
Thank you, David, but I think all of your pictures look great.
Thank you, brother.
So update on previously considered 2019-2020 pending legislation. And this starts on page 169 of your packets. And it's a summary of 6 bills that the board took positions on back in June 5th of 2020. Keeping in mind that this has been a very challenging legislative season. They've had to modify their meeting schedule. They've had to focus on COVID-19, the budget, wildfires. It's just been very crazy. And I want to thank staff and congratulate them for the success that they've had this year. The Ledge was only able to send about 400 and some odd bills over to the governor for his signature. And as you can see, they've got 4 of them going that way. So good job, staff. I'm sorry, 6 bills. So the fact that all 6 bills that the board sponsored were approved by the legislature attests to the board's commitment to sponsoring strong public protection and legislative proposals, support consumer and industry representatives, and diligence by staff. We are very fortunate that these measures have had the success that they've had. This is an informational item only. Does anyone have any questions on these legislative bills? They're on the governor's desk as we speak. Rick, does the public have anything to say?
No comments on this item.
Perfect. Okay, now we move on to agenda item H2, starts on page 173 of your packet. Review, discussion, and possible action on draft residential solar energy system disclosure document. Supporting information pages, Business and Professions Code, Section 7169, Subdivision C. This agenda item involves the completion of a longstanding project between CSLB staff and the Public Utilities Commission to develop a solar energy system disclosure document for consumers who are purchasing a residential solar system. The effort is the result of AB 1070 Gonzalez-Fletcher, which was signed by Governor Brown in 2017 and requires CSLB and PUC coordinate in developing the document. The intent of the legislature with this disclosure is that the consumer be provided, at a minimum, accurate, clear, and concise information regarding the installation of a solar energy system, total costs of installation, anticipated savings, the assumptions and inputs used to estimate the savings, and the implications of various financing options. The draft document begins on page 176 and is ready for the board's review and possible approval. Chief Jay, go ahead and give us a little review on this.
Sure. Thank you, Legislative Committee Chair Beltran. Yeah, as the packet explains, this item is the culmination of years of work on this solar disclosure document. You know, we are talking about a bill that was signed in 2017. The mandatory requirement of this statute is complete. That was the creation of the first page or the cover page of the solar disclosure document. It's out, we're looking for it. Enforcement Division is enforcing it. So today is about the discretionary, and I'm using air quotes, portion of that statute, which allows the board to create a supporting information document or pages behind that first cover page. And the board is authorized by the statute to provide any additional information that consumers might be helpful in those supporting information pages. So what staff is asking the board to basically do today is to consider 2 things. First, does the board approve our course change on this item? And if so, can we send this document to the Public Utilities Commission for their review? And what I mean by course change, as the packet explains, we were initially advised that the only way to implement the discretionary portion of this document was to undergo the administrative rulemaking process, which you're all familiar with. It's a multi-year process to adopt regulations. So we did proceed on that guidance over the last many months, and we eventually did come up with a supporting information packet. And it had 6 separate parts. It was very involved, all of which would have to go into the administrative rulemaking process. It eventually became obvious that it would be quite an undertaking in both time, really matter of years, and effort to get those documents into CSLB regulations. And as you know, in the meantime, our consumer protection efforts in the solar industry have continued. You all heard the registrar update us earlier on our interagency solar task force. So it's become pretty clear that putting out useful supporting information documents now, as opposed to many years from now, would be of most assistance to consumers. So that's our course change. We went back to legal counsel. We came up with a way to put these documents out now instead of putting them in regulation, which we did inform you, board, that we would try to do in 2018. We'd rather put them out now instead of putting them through regulations. So the result of that effort is the draft document that is in your packet. Please let me know if I can answer any questions about this document or why any of this is happening. And that's my update, Augie.
Thanks, Chief. Is there any board comment? Rick, is there any public comment?
No comment on this item.
Okie doke. There are two staff recommendations for this item. Am I on the right page? Yep. There are two staff recommendations for
Excuse
this
me,
item.
Mr. Beltran, I'm sorry. Somebody did just put their hand up. If I can go back to that for just a second.
Sure, shoot.
Okay, Josh Buswell Charkel, go ahead with your comments for 3 minutes.
Great. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Hey, Mike, I did have 2 questions for you on this. One is that you write in here, I believe that one of the benefits of going through this kind of course of action is that once it would be, I'm just looking for it, that once this document is finalized, it would be implemented immediately. So one question I had on that is the CPUC has stated that essentially we would be required, we being the solar industry would be required to use this 30 days after the commission finalizes the supplemental, their input process, right, on the supplemental disclosure. So then there would the process would culminate, and then there would be a 30-day window where at the end of that 30 days we would have to implement it. And I don't see that reflected in this, and I'm wondering if that is your understanding as well, or if I'm incorrect.
Yeah. Josh, I will answer that. Do you mind real quick identifying yourself for the board?
Yeah, my apologies. I'm Josh Buswell Charco. I'm the Deputy Director with the California Solar and Storage Association.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh. So, yeah, the statute requires the CSLB and the PUC coordinate or commiserate or collaborate on creation of this document. So if the board approves the document that's in our packet today, we would send that over to the PUC for their stakeholder process. But then as far as enforcing it, what we would do is something very similar to what we did for the mandatory first page, which is we gave industry a few months to create the document and put it, implement it in their own businesses before the enforcement division started looking for it. And so I imagine we would do something similar, which is after the CSLB finishes its process, after the PUC finishes its process, we would put out an industry bulletin stating generally to the public on such and such a date, the CSLB enforcement division will start looking for this document and its complaints. Jason Hurtado, do you mind sort of opining whether that would be an advisable approach?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Rich. Right. Yeah, that approach seems reasonable. This is the first coming to my attention about an effective date, so this is the first time kind of hearing about that. Again, the board are the final decision makers, so I would present this to the board whether that approach is reasonable. It's at the board's discretion here.
Would we be able to add a third, would it be appropriate for...
Can this item circle back at December's meeting just for kind of a final implementation date and kind of get the board's approval on that? I'm not asking, excuse me.
Hey, Chief.
Yes.
We've been discussing this for quite some time. Let's run these motions, and then the board can decide whether they want to uphold the motion or vote down the motion. And then if they don't pass, then we can talk about moving it to a different date or having an extensive discussion. We've had hour-long, day-long discussions on this stuff, so I don't want to be holding anything up.
Sounds good. We'll go through the staff recommendations on page 175 and take it from there.
All right, Rick, is there any other public comment?
No other public comments at this time.
Okay, I'll go back to the board. Do you guys have any questions? Okay. There's two staff recommendations on this item. On page 175 of your packet, I'm going to read each staff recommendation and then ask for a motion and a comment after each. First recommendation, In lieu of commencing the lengthy regulatory process required to develop a unique solar disclosure document, authorize staff to proceed with implementing the discretionary requirements of Business and Professions Code 7169C as written by limiting the content of the supporting information document to that enumerated in subdivision C, to the exclusion of subparagraphs 2, 3, and 12. At this time, I'll ask for a motion.
Albanese, so moved.
Ruane, second.
I have a motion and a second. Any board comment? Rick, anything from the public?
No public comment.
Felice, please call roll.
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Walla Richardson,
Aye.
Jim Ruane,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson, Johnny, absent, Nancy Springer,
Yes.
Mary Tykert.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The second staff recommendation is to authorize staff to forward the draft to the Public Utilities Commission for review and sharing with stakeholders. And following the stakeholder review process, authorize staff to finalize the document by making any edits suggested by PUC or stakeholders if they are consistent with the requirements of Business and Professions Code 7169C. At this time, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Diana
David
Love,
Delatorre.
second.
Sounded like motion of Ruane. Who was the second?
Diana
Nancy.
Love. I'm sorry.
Diana Love, second. Anything from the board? Rick, anything from the public?
No public comment.
Thank you. Felice, please call roll.
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzilla,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Walla Richardson,
Aye.
Jim Ruane,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson, Johnny, absent, Mary Tykert, Nancy Springer, sorry,
Yes.
Mary Tykert.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Now we're on H3, page 187 of your packets. Update on board study to evaluate sufficiency of current $15,000 contractor bond amount. Business and Professions Code section 7071.6, subdivision E. On page 187 of your packets is more information about this agenda item, which involves the board study of his existing contractor's bond. Chief, why don't you give us an update?
Sure. The update is on page 187, and if the board recalls, during our sunset review, the legislature did ask us to review whether the $15,000 contractor bond was sufficient and present the result of that study or review in January 2021 back to the legislature. Today, the update is that we are still meeting with Surety Association representatives and underwriters and collecting data and reviewing that data. You heard earlier today the registrar mention committee meetings during the first week of November. The legislative committee at that time, the plan is to have them review the draft of the study, and if it looks okay, to send it to the full board in December. That is the update.
Thank you, Chief. Now, this is an informational item only, so are there any questions from the board? Rick, is there anything from the public?
No public comment.
Thank you. Hey, once again, staff, great work working with the legislature this year. I know it was a very challenging year, and you guys are the gold standard. Thank you, and that concludes our report.
Thank you, Augie and Mike. And that completes our business for the day. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved in second. Any comments from the board? Rick, any public comment?
No public comment.
Felice, roll call.
I don't believe we need roll call for adjournment.
Meeting is adjourned.
Bye.
Take care. Be safe.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thank you.